The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps has just pushed the negotiations into a critical zone while the Iranian army talks about regrouping forces and Israel meets while on alert. This Monday, April 27, 2026, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps urgently wants Trump to ease the pressure in the Strait of Hormuz, but without giving in to the main point demanded by Donald Trump, which is the real end of the Iranian nuclear threat and stopping the financing of terrorist groups in the region. I'll tell you all about that in a moment, but right now you'll want to be subscribed to the channel to stay well informed with real-time information and the best journalistic quality you've ever seen. Milson Alves, the standard of credibility. The most serious move came after the Iranian proposal went through mediators from Pakistan. According to the Associated Press, Iran offered to end control over the Strait of Hormuz, but without directly addressing the nuclear program. In exchange, they demanded that the United States end the blockade against Iranian ports. For Washington, this sounds like an attempt to remove military and economic pressure without addressing the cause of the crisis. Trump insists that any agreement must dismantle Iran's path to a nuclear weapon. And there's the point that makes everything more explosive. The Iranian regime is trying to change the conversation. Instead of discussing enriched uranium inspections, guarantees, and ending the nuclear risk, it tries to shift the debate to blockade, sanctions, reparations, and control of Hormuz. It's a change of focus. But for Trump and for Israel, this maneuver doesn't solve anything. It only gives the regime time to breathe, reorganize its machinery, and try to come back stronger to the table. The very statement by Ibrahim Azizi, head of the National Security and Foreign Policy Commission of the Iranian parliament, exposed this logic. He stated that the ceasefire was accepted to rebuild military capacity and replenish weaponry. In other words, the break does not appear as a gesture of peace, but as a strategic pause to regain strength. This reinforces the interpretation that the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps did not abandon the war due to lack of will, but because they needed time. The pressure is also present at sea. The United States Central Command recorded in April actions related to the blockade of ships entering or leaving Iranian ports. In addition to a mine-clearing mission in the Strait of Hormuz and the interception of a vessel attempting to violate the blockade, it's no longer just rhetoric. The American operation is on the ground, at sea, and on the route that sustains the regime's economy. The situation became even more sensitive because Trump canceled the trip of his representatives Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner to Pakistan. The trip would have been part of a new attempt at negotiation, but it was suspended due to the lack of progress. After that, Trump said that Iran could call if it wanted to negotiate. The message was simple: Washington is not going to chase after a weak proposal. The Guardian reported that hopes for progress in the negotiations had diminished, that there were no new talks scheduled, and that the deadlock continued on key issues: Iran's nuclear program, passage through Hormuz, and Tehran's support for armed groups in the region. The newspaper also noted that the previous session in Islamabad lasted 21 hours, but ended without any real progress. Iran tried to place part of the blame on Pakistan. Ebrahim Rezai, spokesperson for the National Security Commission of the Iranian parliament, said that Islamabad would not have credibility to mediate and that its positions would take into account the interests of the President of the United States. This accusation shows the level of irritation within Tehran. When negotiations stall, the regime looks for an external scapegoat, but the crisis did not originate in Pakistan. It originated from Iran's refusal to accept the main point, the end of a nuclear program seen by Washington and Jerusalem as a direct threat. The attempt to shift the nuclear debate to discussions about the blockade, tolls in Hormuz, and sanctions does not convince Trump. It doesn't convince Israel either. For both sides, allowing Iran to buy time without providing guarantees would be repeating old mistakes. Israel keeps up the pressure. The Israeli government declared support for Trump's firm stance to impose a naval blockade on Iran and dismantle what remains of Iran's nuclear capability. This position makes it clear that Jerusalem does not see the crisis as a common commercial or diplomatic dispute. For Israel, the issue is one of national security. That's why the urgent meeting of the Israel Defense Forces and the Security Cabinet carries so much weight. Israel knows that if diplomacy fails, the next phase could be military. And the signal coming from Tehran is not a genuine retreat. It's one of regrouping. When an Iranian parliamentarian admits that the ceasefire served to rebuild forces, the Israeli warning is no longer an exaggeration and becomes a matter of survival. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard is also appearing more and more at the center of Iranian power. Euronews reported that after significant losses in its leadership, command of the Guard passed to Ahmad Vahid, a figure connected to the regime's hardline structure. The report describes the institution as a parallel force with military, economic, political, and regional presence. This detail explains why the negotiation is so stalled. It's not just a foreign minister talking to mediators. The real power lies with the Islamic Revolutionary Guard, which drives the strategy of resistance, threats, and pressure around Hormuz. As long as this faction dominates the decision-making, any agreement is likely to come with maximum demands, few concessions, and a lot of military calculation. Inside Iran, the pressure also reaches the population. The internet shutdown causes daily losses of up to 50 trillion Iranian rials, which is equivalent to about $31 million. According to Jahandir Agazadeh, head of the Internet and Data Transfer Commission of the Tehran Technology Organization. He also stated that about 1/5 of the workforce in digital companies is at risk of being laid off. This digital blackout shows another side of the crisis. The regime tries to control information but ends up hurting its own economy. Small businesses stall, workers lose income, systems become slow, and communication with the outside world is limited. The heavy hand used to control the internal narrative also fuels backlash against the government itself. On the diplomatic front, Abbas Araghchi, Iran's Minister of Foreign Affairs, visited Pakistan, Oman, and Russia in search of support and a diplomatic solution. The AP reported that he arrived in St. Petersburg to meet with Vladimir Putin after regional contacts about the war and about Hormuz. This movement shows that Tehran is trying to form a support network while feeling the blockade tighten. But going to Russia also reveals weakness. When a regime needs to run between mediators, partners, and external powers to ease direct pressure from the US, it's because the situation has become serious. Iran tries to show strength, but its actions indicate urgency. It seeks out Moscow, talks to Oman, accuses Pakistan, and tries to convince the world that it still has control over the board. The main point is that the Islamic Revolutionary Guard seems to have chosen the path of controlled confrontation. It doesn't completely close the door, but tries to dictate the conditions. It doesn't give up its nuclear program, demands an end to the blockade, talks about rebuilding its forces, and accuses mediators. But this strategy becomes more dangerous every day because it gives Israel and the US an argument to keep up the pressure. The risk now is a new round of war, not for lack of warning, but because the Iranian regime insists on keeping Hormuz as a political weapon. And the nuclear program as a bargaining chip for survival. Israel should not accept this combination. Trump also isn't signaling any retreat, and the global market is already feeling the shock in oil prices, transportation, and energy security. In the end, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard walked away from the table because they don't want to give up what really matters. And Iran's preparations for a new military phase show that the ceasefire may have been just a pause. But for Trump, without a serious nuclear deal, without the Guard stopping its support for terrorist groups in the region, and without free passage through Hormuz, war remains an open option. And the next decision may come by force, much more brutal than the earlier phases. Leave a like on this video, subscribe to the channel, and at the end, take a look at the comments so you can be even more engaged with the Milson Alves community.